Okie dokie. So we're going to pick up where we left off. We're in part 2. And my goal tonight is to have us read 4 chapters, chapters 7 through 11, I think. Yeah, I think hopefully that's doable. I know that our 90-minute container here is feeling a little, typically feels a little short, but we'll do our best. Anyone feel willing to or interested in reading chapter? What did I say? We're on chapter. Oh, we're 7. That's right, 7. Sorry, we're doing 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, chapter 8.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. I thought we were on 8. Electricity defined, right?
That's one. Yep.
Electricity is the strain or tension set up by the 2 opposing desires of universal mind thinking: the desire for balanced action and the desire for rest. This electric universe is a complexity of strains caused by the interaction of these 2 opposing interchanging electric desires. All matter is electric. All matter is conditioned into greater or lesser strains according to the intensity of desire, which is the cause of all electric strain to which it is subjected. The farther removed from rest, the greater the strain or tension. That which we call high electric potential is merely great strain to maintain a condition which is far from the condition of rest. The familiar return ball with which a child plays is a good example of electric strain. When the ball is thrown from the hand, the elastic gradually tightens to increase the tension of resistance to strain generated in the elastic. The strain continues to intensify until the ball comes to rest. When the ball returns, the strain gradually lessens until the ball again comes to rest in the child's hand. When this happens, the strain and tension have been voided. Tension has not become rest, it has ceased to be. This whole electric universe is a complex maze of similar tensions. Every particle of matter in the universe is separated from its condition of oneness, just as the return ball is separated from the hand, and each is connected with the other one by an electric thread of light, which measures the tension of that separateness. It is as though all of the universe of separated particles were playing return ball with each other. When a condition of oneness has been attained in matter, the electric tension ceases to be. Sodium chloride will illustrate this meaning. When sodium and chlorine desire separateness from their oneness of condition in sodium chloride, an electric strain is set up between that separated trinity. When the desire for separateness has gone out of sodium and chlorine, the electric tensions which bound them to the rest condition from which they sprang are voided. Likewise, sodium and chlorine are utterly voided. The reason for this is because all matter in a series of electric tensions, because all matter is a series of electric tensions. When the tensions cease, the conditions set up by them cease. It is as though 2 children on a seesaw withdrew into their fulcrum. Sex tensions and strains intensify the farther they are removed from rest. When unbalanced sex tensions void their unbalance through interchange between the opposite electric desires which caused those tensions, electrical force ceases to be. Likewise, sex desire ceases to be. Electrical tensions exist only between unbalanced electrical matter in motion, which is separated from other electrical matter in motion. Wherever there is a condition of rest, electricity ceases to be. Electricity is, therefore, a dual force which seemingly unbalances a condition of rest by dividing it into 2 opposite conditions and sets them in seeming motion. Interchange between the 2 opposites of motion voids the unbalanced condition at the end of each cycle of electric expression. As rest cannot be unbalanced save by illusion, electricity which causes that illusion has no existence.
Thank you. Nice reading.
Oh, thanks.
Let's do the next one. Let's do chapter 9. Anyone else want to read?
I'll read.
Thank you.
This is my first time reading since TOTOH became a PMA, just giving myself a pat on the back.
Pat, 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 pat. Pat you on your back too.
The two electric desires. Electricity is the servant of mind. It does all of the work of creating this light wave universe in unfolding, refolding sequences which mind desires. The universal mind has two desires: the desire for creative expression through the action of concentrative thinking, and the desire for rest from action through decentrative thinking. One desire is for separation from oneness into unbalanced multiplicity, and the other is for avoidance of multiplicity into balanced oneness. One desire is for action and the other for rest. These two desires of mine constitute the give for regiving principle, by means of which giving all things in nature grow or unfold by appearing from the void of rest in the kingdom of heaven, from which all creating things appear, disappear, and reappear in sequential cycles. The electric expression of the two desires is reflected in the pulse beat of the universe. One pulsation compresses, the other expands. The compressive pulsation gives form to idea by seeking rest at wave amplitudes through centripetal action. The destructive pulsation voids form to seek rest at wave axis through centrifugal reaction. These two opposite desires are characteristic of all effects of motion. All animal, vegetable, and mineral life seek action and rest alternately. All effects of motion manifest that principle. A ball thrown in the air seeks rest from its action and returns from its unbalanced condition to seek rest through reaction. After a day of work, man rests from action so that he may repeat his day of action. Because of these two opposite desires of universal mind thinking, all creating things appear on earths from the void of their heaven, disappear from their earths into their void in the heavens, and reappear from that void to repeat their desires. This explains the mystery of matter appearing from space to be alternately swallowed by space.
Very clear. Very nice. Thank you, Rachel, for that lovely reading.
I'll be here every Tuesday.
Nice. Shall we go ahead and pause there and discuss what we just read?
Well, it seems like what's being discussed is the creation of the universe, and then it's coalescing again into oneness in general.
Correct. Exactly. Precisely. And the thing that's interesting that I think we could discuss is, Ra depicts the octave of creation, and Ra depicts that same phenomenon where, the octave comes into form from oneness and then has a whole galactic experience. And then eventually the whole galaxy returns back to oneness, right? So that's a coming into form from oneness and then returning back into oneness. And that process is incredibly long, right? That's a very long time scale. And then what we're reading about here is a very different time scale. Now, what he's describing, the way that the two electric forces, the two electric desires operate, they operate at a variety of scales. And the scale that we're talking about here, for the most part, is a much shorter scale. So I think the principles we've just read do apply to larger timescales and larger phenomenon. But somehow when I read this, it's the first step, which is the photon, or matter, this sort of the building blocks of matter. And they are coming into form from oneness and then returning back into oneness very, very quickly. And then that cycle repeats. That breath, that rhythm is repeating, as a frequency at a very, very rapid rate. And the same thing happens at all scales, building up matter from there as well. Does that make sense?
So, what is the length of the time frame that he's talking about, do you think?
That's a great question. Millions of times a second. I'm not sure. That's a guess. That's a not based in anything. But I think I think some of these frequencies have been measured, in laboratories and stuff. Like there's so much modern capacity to peer into these small scales of the elements. But something like that, something like incredibly fast, thousands or millions of times a second or something.
So these like oscillations is how I'm thinking of it,
Yeah.
is creates matter, and
Right.
how like the table is just molecules vibrating like really, 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 really fast. And
That's
is
right.
it true that the faster thing is harder? Like the faster it vibrates, the more solid it is, and like a less hard thing would vibrate a little less fast?
It's a really good question. I'm not sure what the answer to that is. From my understanding, the further along, so we'll look at a chart that Walter Russell has made of the periodic table, but his version of it is very different. It's laid out very different than the Mandeleaf table.
It's beautiful. It's like a spiral.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's organic. It's what you would expect. It's how the elements of matter actually line up along a wave. And the further along that octave wave you get, the higher the frequency is. And that's when you get into the very, plutonium and the radioactive elements. So are they more dense? I think so. I'm not really sure what the answer to that is. At the beginning is hydrogen. The lower frequency ones are hydrogen. And then, it moves up through like helium and finally carbon. Carbon's right about at the middle. And in terms of density, actually, I think what Walter Russell says is the most dense are at the middle of the octave. And we'll learn why that is when we get into the chart. So yeah, it's a good question. And I don't really know. I don't really have a good answer to that.
I just want to say a thing because it's so alive for me. And this is
Yeah.
the place where my mind kind of blows out when I contemplate the nature of reality. And this is the place I got to in the conversation today. And the way it's coming forward to me now is like, well, here's this table and here's this couch, and they're really different. And it's not actually a table, it's a footlocker, an old army issue footlocker. And it's been around way longer than this couch. And this couch is going to look the same no matter who walks in this room. And it's going to deteriorate before this footlocker does. And like those things is where it starts. Like when I'm contemplating like perception and like, okay, so we're like different sort of like eyeballs on the bee eye of God is how my friend described it today. Like we're each, have this little window of perception where we're like kind of looking at the same thing from the same place, but we don't know that because of the veil and the separate, the individuation and all of that. But like we're walking on this brick sidewalk, and that brick, like I'm looking at it and you're looking at it and we're both seeing the same brick, and that lady over there is going to see the same damn brick if she looks at it. And when we leave, that brick is still going to be there. So what is that?
Well, why wouldn't it still be there? What's the challenge for you about that?
It's the place that I can't like penetrate is the relationship between perception and matter. And like if reality is like a co-created projection, which is how I think of it, like the oneness and then the individuateds like
Right.
are co-creating this thing.
Yep.
Okay. But if the individuateds aren't here looking at it, it's like the, you know, the if a tree falls in the woods, does anyone hear it? Well, or does it make a sound? Does it
Right.
make a sound?
Yep.
Is question, right? And I was thinking about that. It's like, well, it definitely like creates some vibrations. So if there's any mechanism for hearing, yes, it creates a sound. But if that mechanism for hearing isn't there, the vibrations still are, right? Or aren't they?
Well, I want to share my thoughts about that. So the koan, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, doesn't make a sound, is very anthropocentric, or whatever the word is. It's very like, you know, the assumption there is that like humans create the universe, third density entities create the universe. That's not true. All the first and second density life in the forest would hear the tree fall, even if there's no people there.
Well, they would feel the vibration, or they would
Mhm.
understand that something happened.
Sure. Well, and they can hear, animals can hear.
You know,
So here's my broader comment on that. My understanding is that Walter Russell's depiction of this octave wave of matter, which is basically how do all the elements come into form? How do they wind up from light? That's basically a map of first density. And I shared this on the thread this week. I think he's built a very accurate map of first density, all the elements, right? And then in second density, life is figuring out how to assemble that matter into forms that can move and seek the light and have a different experience of consciousness. So my understanding is that at the level of first and second density, that's the logos creating. The logos creates matter, and the logos creates biological life. And at third density, we are given the great honor duty of being able to co-create with the logos, with God. So we can begin to use our power of creation to manifest through light. Now, most of our creations in most humans, we create physically through our hands or through, using the power of physicality. I do very much think it's possible to create in a more direct way through thought. And in fourth density, we begin to get into that work more directly. Thoughts become things. And in third, we're kind of like practicing, and we mostly use physical material to create. So, so the logos is holding the brick and your table and your couch into place, in place. The logos has given those materials to Earth. People have taken those materials and created couches and footlockers and bricks in their desire, in the image of their desire, but they don't keep them in place because they look at them. That's how I would respond to that.
I think that's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah.
I wanted to just make a meta comment. Actually, I'm not sure that it's meta or not, but reading through chapter 9, it occurs to me that maybe the creation of the world was not a big bang. Maybe it was just a pulse. Maybe it was a series of pulses. And those pulses are still reverberating throughout our entire galaxy. I find that very fascinating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, May, you're tuning right into Walter Russell's perspective on this. He does not agree with the Big Bang Theory. He has a very different idea. The Big Bang Theory kind of purports that there is this huge explosion, this huge, projection of matter into the universe out of where, we don't know. And then eventually there's going to be a reversal of that, and there'll be a big crunch, or there'll be a heat death of the universe. And Walter Russell calls that the one-way model of the universe. And he says it's not a one-way model. It's a perpetually renewing universe. It never began, and it will never end. Now there are rhythms. There are galaxies are born and they do die, like Ra talks about. But in terms of the universal scale, Walter Russell his science is not a Big Bang theory. It's an infinite universe. And it seems compatible with what Ra says. Ra says, that creations they do begin and then end and then start again. But that process probably has been going on forever. I mean, it's an infinite universe. Ra says very clearly it's an infinite universe. So,
well, and if time doesn't actually exist and we're just here like stuck in linear time trying to see that beginning and the end of the line, like that's just not how it works.
Right. That's right. Yeah, I watched a documentary on Netflix last night about infinity, and it was so disappointing. It was really the graphics were so beautiful, the production quality was incredibly high, but it was not this is just my opinion, but it was so empty. Like the scientists and the specialists and the physicists who were talking about infinity, I just think we're so blessed to be able to study Ra and study this material, because it includes the creator. Like the creator is intelligent infinity. So infinity is bundled with the quality of intelligence and with the quality of love and with the quality of sentience. And it's so warm. And the scientific consensus today about infinity is mathematical and empty and dry. And it's got it's like, wow, you guys, how do you stay passionate about this?
I remember, I'm trying to think of who said it. It was a physicist. And maybe you all know, but there's this, I'll try to find it. But because I'm going to paraphrase it too. But this physicist was quoted as saying, when you first become a scientist, you become an atheist, but the more you study or something, and then you start to believe in God. That was a horrible paraphrasing, but I'm seeing nodding, so you might be familiar with it, and I hope you are for the sake of the person who originally said it, because it's a really beautiful quote.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what it reminds me of. Is I think I see a lot of scientists really not there yet. They haven't gone deeply enough into science to find God at the other side. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah. Well, we're still in very much in a material based. Most of world civilization is operating from a material based conception of what reality is. And science is fairly squarely, explicitly, taking that perspective. Most scientists take a materialist perspective. The empirical method relies on what can be sensed and observed with our 5 senses. So, all that can be sensed is what's part of the so-called physical universe. But we all know that there's more to it than that. More to reality. This was written, The Secret of Light was written in 1947 1947. And this was a lot more, this material was a lot more controversial then than it is now. There's been a lot of science that has actually, proven that Natalie's coffee table isn't solid. Like when you look closer and closer and closer, you don't find anything. It's just space down there. And there's fields, there's fields of energy that appear to us as matter, but that's no longer a very controversial statement. It used to be. Any other questions or comments about any of that we've read so far? Okay, I'll read the next chapter. Chapter 10, the unfolding-refolding principle. The two opposite electric expressions of desire of mind unfold all idea of mind from its pattern in the seed into imaged forms to simulate the idea of mind, and refold it back into its recorded pattern in the seed, for again unfolding. Each one unbalances the other in order that each may seek balance in the other to disappear and reappear as the other. Positive electricity is the father light, which gravitates toward a point of rest, which centers all creating things. Negative electricity is the mother light, which radiates toward planes of the one light at rest, which bound all wave fields of motion. Positive electricity winds the light of motion into dense solids around points of still magnetic light. It compresses motion into incandescent spheres surrounded by the vacuity of negative electricity. Negative electricity unwinds the light of motion from dense solidity to tenuous vacuity by expanding it into cube wave fields of space. Positive electricity pulls inward spirally from within against the opposing resistance of negative electricity, which thrusts outward spirally from within. There's a footnote here, and I believe what they say is that he changed Walter Russell later in his writing and teaching, he changed the way that he thinks about this. He actually doesn't think that it's a pull. Positive electricity, he changed to, instead of pulling inwardly, it's pushed inwardly. It's still an inward. Positive is towards the center. So positive is creating suns, sort of winding up suns, winding up photons. Negative is unwinding them. But yeah, sorry, I could find the footnote, but I'd have to scroll to the end of my PDF here. It might take a while. So anyway, the footnote is he no longer, later in his work, no longer said pulls. Positive electricity does not pull. Nothing pulls in the universe. This two-way radial universe of seeming motion is the product of these two opposed electric conditioners of matter, which pass through each other in opposite directions. Each interchanges with the other in sequential pulsations as they pass through each other from points of gravity to wave field boundaries and back again in endless cycles. Each becomes the other at halfway rest points of their cycles. Large-scale examples of this process can be seen in any of the spiral nebula, notably Nebula 74, Pisceum. Two fiery spiral arms of radiating mother light reach out from the equator of its central sun to born its countless other suns and earths by unfolding them from its centering seed. I'll look that up here in a second and show you. We'll look at that. Two black arms of gravitating father light pull spirally inward from the heavens toward the poles of the centering giant sun to generate the sun in incandescent oneness of all form. And there's that same footnote about the pole. The father light of gravity refolds all unfolding forms from creation's seed in formless light of suns and gives them growing bodies. Gravitation is the male principle of creation. Gravity refolds toward the seed. Radiation is the female principle of creation. Radiation unfolds from the seed. The generating light of gravitation and the degenerative light of radiation are projected through each other from rest to rest in pulsing sequences to manifest idea by borning father-mother forms of idea through their voiding interchange. This principle of rhythmic balanced interchange between father-mother lights of gravitation and radiation is fundamental in all creating things. It is the principle of two-way equal giving which manifests the quality of love in the light of the one. All right, I'm going to pull up an image here of Messier 74. Is that what we're looking at? Let me just remind myself. Oh, Nebula 74. There we go. Well, I don't know if that's a very good example or a good picture of it. I could have been more prepared. I could have had this pulled up already. Sorry, friends. Oh, here we go. How's this one? I mean, I think we're looking at a galaxy, a standard galaxy with spiral arms. My apologies. I'm not doing a very good job at finding.
Not you.
Oh, here we go. Yeah, you can sort of see the structures. You can see the structures of the dark spiraling arms and the light spiraling arms. I'm not sure there's anything necessarily particularly unique about Messier 74 than what we kind of tend to know about galaxies. They have a light arm and a dark arm. Is that making sense? Sorry, I wish I had a better image to show about it.
You're good. I'm also reading the note about the inward.
Do you want to read that to us?
Well, I'm just going to read some highlights. How about that?
Okay.
Bear in mind the fact that you are compressing from the outside inward. There is no force of any nature which holds it together by an inward pull. Nature does not attract, nor does it repel. It compresses within a vacuum. The word magnetism is unjustifiable. The word gravity should be used instead, for gravity both multiplies and divides by thrusting inward from without to compress and outward from within to expand. One of these two electric conditions thrusts inward toward a center to create a centripetal vortice to simulate gravity. On the other side of the dividing equator, the other condition thrusts outward from a center to create a centrifugal vortice to simulate vacuity. An outward explosion compresses in advance of the direction of the action and simultaneously evacuates in the opposite direction. Whoa. The following half of the cycle is in reverse. The evacuated condition becomes a compressed one, and the compressed condition becomes an evacuated one. Yep.
Yeah. So it's all push.
It's like,
go ahead, May.
It's like if you're funneling back through the back of the book and seeing some of these spirals back there, you can really imagine that. It's like a slinky, but it going and deeper centrifugally, in like a centrifuge. And so, and the axiom that the fulcrum is the center point of it all. I find that very, I can't only imagine, does that fulcrum vibrate or is it completely still? Like how does it handle all of that action going in, coming out, and then like turning inside out, and then like I would love to be like a fly on the wall in the middle of the fulcrum, and just that just feels really juicy to me.
Yeah. Really, I mean, if I could have set up this our journey together, you know, it's asking a lot, but it'd be so good if everyone actually had read through the whole thing first, and then we read through and discussed it, because you have to go through a lot of words before you get to the third part, which is where the images are, and the images clarify a lot, y'all. So here we are, you know, we're winding through these verbose descriptions of these quite specific geometries and, you know, and forces, but it's all words, and, you know, most people aren't able to translate that to a picture in their head. It's difficult to do, but it gets easier once we get into the pictures. So I hope that is some measure of reassurance to you. If it's not fully landing yet, we're priming ourselves for when we get into the pictures. It's going to make a lot more sense, I think.
I took a sneak peek only because I was trying to find all of the footnotes. I haven't even been back that far in this book yet. So
Great. Yeah, I highly
anyway.
recommend it to everybody. Just go ahead and, you know, if you have some time, just flip through the images and look at the captions of the images and start to just familiarize yourself with some of the forms. All motion is spiral, he says. All motion in the universe is spiral. Okay. Shall we go ahead and read the last chapter?
Sure, I'll read.
Okay.
Okay, chapter 11. The illusion of attraction and repulsion of matter. One of the great illusions of the senses is that matter attracts and repels matter. It is also believed that oppositely charged electrical particles attract each other and, like charges, repel. There is much evidence of the senses to justify such a conclusion, but it is of the same elusive nature as the evidence which deceives the senses that railroad tracks seem to meet upon the horizon. We see the tides rise toward the moon on one side of the earth and away from it on the other. We conclude that the moon attracts the earth and thus pulls the ocean toward it. But that does not account for the fact that the tides also rise on the opposite side of the earth away from the moon. What is actually happening is that all conditioned matter is constantly seeking to balance its condition with all other matter. The moon and the earth center their own respective wave fields surrounded by space. All wave fields are bound by planes of zero curvature and a zero pressure condition, which insulate each field in the universe from every other field. The very shapes of wave fields of the earth and moon are forever changing to adjust their balance as the moon revolves around the earth. As a result, the mutual equators of both fields must lengthen disc-like on a plane which intersects the center of gravity of each body. Naturally, the tides rise toward and away from the moon. If the earth were all liquid instead of solid, it likewise would lengthen appreciably at its equators, disc-like, and flatten at its poles. to meet the interchange of balance between the fields of the moon and sun, as Jupiter and the outer planes are so noticeably doing. It would also throw off rings, as Saturn and all the stars of heaven are doing, and for the same reason. Polarity. We see the positive role of a compass needle pointing toward the negative pole of a magnet, and the negative pole of the magnet pointing toward the positive pole. This evidence is one of the bases of our conclusion. This is what our eyes see. What actually is happening is that they are avoiding each other's unbalanced condition to seek balance through each other. Opposite poles get as far away from each other as they can until their opposition is voided by balance in their fulcrum and they cease to be. When the positive role of a magnet is brought into contact with the negative pole of another magnet, that effect which we think of as attraction is one of avoidance. It is a cessation of opposition or power to manifest anything. Polarity utterly ceases at that point, and each opposite ends to each opposite end, each getting away from the other and through the other spirally as far as it can. If opposite poles attracted each other, they would be together in the middle of a magnet instead of at its ends. Matter is powerless to attract. Matter neither attracts nor repels other matter. Unbalanced conditions in matter seek balanced ones. All matter is motion, constantly seeking rest. This it can find only by balancing its condition with matter similarly conditioned, by avoiding the tensions of its sexed condition. That alone is the cause of motion and the reason for its continuance or discontinuance. All matter in motion seeks first. This is a universe of one thing. All matter which is electrically separated from that oneness seeks it. This is a fundamental principle and underlying desire of all creation. It is as true of humans and their emotions as it is of matter. We again repeat that electricity is a division of the one light into two extensions of that light projected through each other, each becoming the other alternately. The one light is a pressureless and sexless condition. The two lights are extended from one, are opposed pressures and opposed sexed conditions. Thus, there are but two conditions of matter, either expanding from stillness or contracting towards stillness. Each condition arises from the other. The instant it becomes its own opposite, it gets as far away from that opposite as is necessary to find balance in a like condition. It seeks its like condition to find rest in a balanced condition, and not because the matter of it is attracted by the matter it seeks. A log floating down a stream is seeking a balanced condition and is not being attracted by the dam or by other logs. These opposites represent the compression extension father-mother principle, which integrates light into solids and disintegrates it into vapors and gases. All moving masses are unbalanced. To say that these opposites attract each other is equivalent to saying that the north attracts the south, that inward attracts outward, and that wetness attracts dryness, or that darkness attracts incandescence. Water, for example, is a compressed condition. When water vaporizes, it expands into its own opposite condition. It then seeks rest in clouds of like condition. When it thus finds rest in a balanced condition, its motion ceases and its opposition also ceases. Elusive as evidence. Another effect of motion, which has misled the senses into believing that opposites attract, is that hot air is said to rise toward cold and cold air to descend toward heat. That is not what is happening, for like seeks like. Cooling air is expanding and rising toward cold, and heating air is contracting and falling toward heat. Negative oxygen bubbles gather at the positive pole of a charging electric battery, and positive hydrogen bubbles gather at the negative pole. What is actually happening is that the positive pole is taking the positive condition out of the water, leaving the negative oxygen as residue. The negative pole is likewise taking the negative condition out of the water, leaving the positive hydrogen as residue. Again, like seeks like. The outstanding demonstration of the principle of like conditions seeking like is in the elements of matter. If opposites attracted opposites according to present concepts, it would be impossible to gather together 1 ounce of the same elements. All elements seek their kind. In any chemical decomposition of compounded mixtures, each element seeks and finds similarly conditioned elements. Nature's gyroscopic principle does this automatically. Every element has its own gyroscopic relation to the axis and amplitude of its wave. Each seeks that relation of pressure and moves until it finds itself in the orbit of its own gyroscopic plane of pressure. What is that word? I think I pronounced it 5 different times.
Gyroscopic.
Gyro.
Gyro.
Thanks.
Thanks for reading me.
Sure.
Okay, can we talk about the illusion of magnetism?
Yes.
Please?
Yes.
What? It's so crazy. If opposite poles attracted each other, they would be together in the middle of a magnet instead of at its ends. I think my mind just needs a minute with this one.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody has anything to say about it, that might be helpful.
Well, if you visualize 2 simple bar magnets, right? 2 of the poles are going to click together. Then it operates as a new system. So the positive and negative charge at my thumbs is voided. There's no longer a difference of charge. Now there's the charge at the ends that's doubled. So 2 bar magnets, when they come together, become a system, because the energy is flowing through their atoms, through the element of them. I don't have my mind fully wrapped around the question you're asking, but that's one thing I can offer to it.
So
in other
then,
words, the structure of charge the structure of how magnets are charged can change. It's not a property of the metal. It's a property of the condition in the elements of the magnet. And so that's why when you put 2 magnets together, it'll create an entirely different configuration of how it's flowing, magnetic force.
so then if the 2 negative parts are touching, wait, my bad. So if a positive is touching a negative, then by what we're talking about, that negative, the negative charged is trying to get back to negative. It doesn't want to have anything to do with charged, the positive.
Well, it's wanting to get back to stillness, back to oneness.
Back to still, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so it
so
finds
negative-
oneness with itself. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
So the negative charge is an expression of strain away from oneness. All force, all electricity is an expression of strain because it's left oneness and it wants to get back. Everything wants to get back. Right. Does that make sense, May?
Yeah, yeah, that was a good example. And then I feel bad for the magnet that's stuck together from one negative charged part to a positive charged part from two separate magnets, because they're wanting to come back into stillness, right? They're wanting to get back into oneness with itself, and it can't. I wonder if how that affects the universe. Like, I don't know. It's very interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can empathize with that if the creator only had one desire, which is to return to oneness. But Walter Russell says that's one of the two desires. The creator wants to experience action. It wants to experience relationship. It wants to experience its infinite capacity. It can't do that unless it manifests a universe to do that. And it also has the balanced desire to also be one. And that's the engine. So you don't have to feel bad, May. Magnet is fulfilling the creator's desire. For magnet. for
That's incredible. Yeah.
Jim, what were you? It sounded like you wanted to say something.
I was going to ask you, you were talking about putting two magnets together and creating one so that at the ends would repel and the middle would attract?
No, I'm sure everyone's seen the metal filings diagrams where you take a simple bar magnet and the metal filings will line up in kind of like arced shapes from end to end, right?
Right.
You've seen that. Well, my understanding is if you put two magnets together, the metal filings don't then go to the middle anymore. They go around the whole thing. It
Right.
makes
So you made one big
field.
magnet out of those.
Yeah, it makes one big magnet. That's all I was trying to
Okay.
say.
If you cut that magnet in half, does the same thing happen?
Yes, yes, that's exactly the same thing happens. Yep.
Infinitely.
Yes, and the point, if I'm getting this correctly, the point he's making is that those forces that we can see if we sprinkle metal filings into the field, they're not a quality of the metal, of the matter. They're a quality of the energy that's creating the metal, and those atoms that make up the energy that creates the magnet. They're able to flow through that material, right? So like so that, and I think this is not very, what am I trying to say? This is not controversial. The atoms rearrange, or the charges of the atoms within the magnets rearrange once you put two together, or if you cut one in half. These are hard things to talk about with just words, you guys. It's like if I had some magnets here, we could but even then, how do you, we're not in the same room. Anyway, I also don't necessarily think that this chapter, the main point of the chapter is fundamental to understanding the bigger picture. Sometimes he's trying to dispel principles in mainstream science that he thinks are incorrect. And this is one of them. And we don't necessarily need to get the illusion of the attraction and repulsion of matter to get the bigger picture. So I just wanted to put that out there. If it doesn't land, if his talking about the illusion of the attraction and repulsion of matter isn't making a whole lot of sense, I'd say leave it behind for now. It's not a super important point.
Well, if there's no other burning questions, could we talk about the air example? Because that's not making sense to me either.
Okay, which one is that? Help me, remind me where we're looking.
Evidence on page 157, it says, another effect of motion which has misled the senses into believing that opposites attract is that hot air is said to rise toward cold and cold air to descend toward heat. That is
Yeah.
not what's happening for like seeks like. And then this part in italics, to me, it would make sense if it was opposite, but it doesn't make sense to me. Cooling air
Mhm.
is expanding and rising toward cold.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, I
heat
don't get that either.
is contracting and falling toward heat. But what we experience in a room is cold air down here and warmer air up here. So it would make more sense to me if it said heating air is contracting and rising toward heat instead of falling.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I agree with that, because like when there's a thunderstorm, it gets real hot and muggy, so there's a lot of heat, but then once it rains, then it cools off. So like it doesn't seem like that. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't feels like we've been taught the opposite of that. So it's hard to wrap your mind around the opposite of that.
Right. Yeah, I get it, you guys. That baffles me too. Now I'm totally getting what you're saying there, and I don't know what to say about it.
I mean, I wonder if he's a little dyslexic and he got it mixed up.
It's possible. It's kind of seems like it.
Just in that one sentence.
But the law, yeah.
I mean, I can kind of start wrapping my head around, oh, it's not the thing we were taught. It's actually like an opposite kind of pulling. It's that pulling energy that he's talking about. The centrifugal and the centripetal, the balancing of opposites, but just that language. But it's very obvious that the heat is up and the cold is down.
Right.
And,
yeah, you feel we experience it all the time.
yeah.
Yeah, I asked Don years ago, does hot air rise? And he said, no, cold air falls and pushes hot air up.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense to me. Cold air is heavier, denser.
Yeah, I'm baffled. I'm stumped. I wonder if that's just one of the places where it got switched. In my reading through this and the other books I've read of his, there is a profound consistency. Like he'll say things, he'll repeat things, and he'll say them lots of different ways, and they're coherent. Like they make sense. It's a coherent system. It's one of the reasons why I felt so drawn to this. It's just like it's very similar to Ra. Like I feel like Ra's system is very consistent. But yeah, this doesn't seem consistent. I'm going to meditate on it, and if I can come up with anything, I'll let you all know. But it confuses me too.
I wanted to ask a question that kind of brings this information into metaphysical territory, which I'm not sure if this material is intended for that. But if like attracts like, and we're all unbalanced, is that why we tend to attract? It's like if we're all like unintentionally trying to balance ourselves, is that kind of like why we attract people, situations that like correspond with that unbalanced state in us, if that makes any sense?
It's a really good question.
Like like for example, like before I was a super healed enlightened person. No, I'm just kidding. um but like from my own experience, like before I started any healing work, I had like daddy issues. And so then I would attract that thing that would help balance the daddy issue. Until I kind of figured out the pattern and and started healing work. So I'm just thinking like if like attracts like, and we're all unbalanced in various ways, like if that accounts for the metaphysical attracting of other unbalanced situations.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I feel like that the opposite is also true. So the parts where you are balanced, that you are attracting those same attributes into your life to mirror those balances. So if what we're reading is true, then you are balancing a lot more than what you may realize.
I actually relate to like attracts like more than I relate to opposites attract. Like when I look at my patterns of attraction or like what irritates me about other people, or like you named the daddy issues thing, like the like really intense catalytic relationship that I had that was like perfectly highlighting all those places of wounding that hadn't been addressed yet. Like that all seems like attracts like to me. Like the things that irritate me the most about other people are the things that irritate me about myself, or the places where I can go out of balance.
The one comment I want to make about it is that the way I understand from Ra's teaching and also from my own experience, the way we become balanced is by experiencing contrast, by experiencing unbalance, and finding the wholeness of that experience. Like we have we can have very challenging experiences. And, Ra talks about the balancing exercises where we need to find the opposite of the thing that we're experiencing and see how that's a part of us too. And so, yeah, my understanding of entities, when we get more and more balanced, it's because we've gone through contrast. I don't think you become balanced. Like, I think the process of the metaphysical process you're referring to, Rachel, is maybe not as like singular as some of these the physics of light that he's describing. Like I don't know if there's a one-to-one correlation. There may be, but it feels like we become balanced through somehow through the experiences we have, coming in contact with the sort of two opposite ends of the thing that we're exploring.
Well, going back to, I think, a previous study where we were discussing, and even this one, where we were discussing the positive and negative poles voiding each other. And I had asked the question of what if that place of avoidance is wholeness, or, is the creator, is the universe at rest? And I'm trying to not bring up the law of one that much because I know this is a secret life study group, but y'all know that's my jam.
It's very welcome here. You can bring it
up. But what Ra says about the positive and negative polarities, kind of that there can be a depolarization that happens when the positive polarity tries to engage with the negative polarity, and vice versa. If they like butt head, there's like this tension that kind of, it's like repelling that they both become depolarized when they interact with one another. So that is just the image that keeps coming to mind when we're discussing this chapter, is that it's just like avoidance. And then there's also the talking about the balancing exercises. Since reading this book, I've started thinking of the balancing exercises as a metaphysical practice avoidance of what Walter Russell discusses, where you bring in the opposites and they void and they neutralize one another. And that's what I thought about when I think of the balancing exercises. It kind of feels like when you're engaging in those opposites and those contrasts, and then you kind of become you can see it all in yourself, and then you're kind of at neutral place.
Yep.
And I won't say unpolarized because we're still in the state of where we're polarizing, but Ra's beyond polarized, the polarized state. So I think that exercise kind of lends towards that progression. That makes
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, and there, it's this tricky thing about tracking the difference between charge as it relates to like light and matter in the universe and metaphysical polarity, which is a kind of charge that I think our souls experience in order to propel us along the line of light through the octave, back towards the one at the end of the octave. And, of course, there must be a very clear correlation between those two things, but I don't have the map of like how we polarize as souls and how that relates to matter. I don't exactly know how that, I don't have that very clear in my mind, but I do think there's a relationship. And I appreciate what you say about contemplating the avoidance, as we try to balance and neutralize the emotional charge we have about a situation.
Yeah, the only thing that comes to mind of how one would like take the metaphysical and kind of correspond it to the physics of it is if we think of the heart like a magnet, and when the heart is activated, then it's the positive charge, and if the heart's not activated, then it's the negative charge. And totally taking, ethics or morals or good and bad, whatever, taking all of that out of the equation, it could just be that the heart or the energy center that's embedded in the heart currently is like you kind of are choosing which pole to be on in that magnet that's connected to everything else. Does that make sense?
I love that.
I don't know
image.
if I'm making sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm totally feeling that vibe, because if the fulcrum then would be our heart, the fulcrum would be in a space that's in continual unconditional love. And so love is the fulcrum. That's everything right there. And when you have lots and lots of love, then you go up and have or that's whatever. I just lost my train of thought, but anyhow, that's what I was just getting. Yeah, love's the fulcrum.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was. So when there's this tension, even within ourselves, but with specifically with another person, so you've got tension within yourself, you're trying to balance yourself, then you come in contact with another individual that just triggers the crap out of you. So then you've got all, we're familiar with this. We do this all the time. And so the like attracts like. So we're wanting peace, we're wanting harmony, but then we still have we have all this energy of the tension, and it's very interesting. So what do we do with that? Do we just need to always just bring it back into the heart, and that's what we're all talks about. Anyway, that's all I want to say about that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Trying to see if I can find the piece I was going to make a comment about. Well, relating to what you said, Rachel, I really appreciated this paragraph. This is a universe of one thing on the bottom of 155. All matter which is electrically separated from that oneness seeks it. This is a fundamental principle and underlying desire of all creation. It is as true of humans and their emotions as it is of matter. So I think that is pointing to, the metaphysics and the sort of emotional experience we have. And I think here what he's saying is our emotions are a mechanism to help guide us back into oneness, because we all want it. We all desire it. We all, all souls desire ultimately to be back in oneness. And our emotions are like the guidance system to help us navigate that, that core desire. And yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting. I think that's the whole bridge between understanding these principles we're studying and how they apply to our lives in a more our relationships and our healing journeys and these sorts of things is fascinating. I'd like to continue looking at that.
I want to say that it's because emotions have a magnetic charge, but we're learning that the magnetism isn't a thing.
Well, emotions are clearly a charge. Like, there's the emotions we enjoy, that we call joyful emotions, and I feel like they have a certain charge. And then there's the emotions we don't enjoy, and they have the other charge. And it's information about how we're viewing the world and how it aligns with our essential knowing.
I definitely sense, I used to always think that emotions were sort of magnetic, but I can imagine them being an electrical impulse because they do move you along the lines of the continuum of that emotion, if you're not mindful of it, especially. But you can sense that. I've always thought of it as magnetic because I've always thought when I have an emotion, I feel drawn to act a certain way or say a certain thing that's along the continuum of that emotion. But it's not really a drawing, it's an electrical pushing that kind of makes me want to, it's like that electrical, the energetic impulse to move along the lines of that emotion. Yeah, and I guess balancing it with balancing the east to the west can bring one back to the center.
Yeah, I think so. It also corresponds to what Ross says too. Well, friends, any final thoughts?
Not to put you on the spot, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are right now, Jim. Do you have anything else that you want to say?
I've really enjoyed how this session has gone from the explicit description of the folding, unfolding electrical universe into metaphysical realms of personal journeys of spiritual seeking and the emotions and balancing and becoming whole, 360-degree beings like the Creator is.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it's one of the things about this group that I love so much is that we really consistently translate this high metaphysics to like our lives, and how do we make it usable, and how do we really apply it and embody it, not just be brainiacs about it. Yeah, I appreciate that a lot from all of you.
I like that too.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for being along on this ride. We're about halfway, well, maybe just tipping the point past halfway through the book. So I hope it's all starting to, or continuing to gel. Yeah, it's been a nice, sweet, small, intimate little circle tonight. I've appreciated it and enjoyed it. Thank you all for your contributions.
Indeed.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for hosting us, Moo.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Okay, everyone. See you later. Take care.
Good night.
Have a great night.
You too.
Love you all.
Love you.
Love you too. Aw.